So many of you have asked for it. So here it is. It's your LSU baseball complete season preview. It's Locked on LSU. Let's go.
You are Locked on LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, let's get it. It is Locked on LSU, your team every day. I'm your host, Matt Moscona. Thanks so much for making us your first listen. We're free, available wherever you get podcasts, of course, on YouTube as well. So please subscribe. As always, one of the fastest ways to help us grow is by leaving your comments below. So thank you for that. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here. And there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. All right, let's dive into the 2025 LSU Baseball Tigers, which are a preseason number 2 or 3 consensus, depending on which service you subscribe to. We'll talk about what the Tigers lose, what they have coming back, and what the expectations are. But let us begin with where last season ended. So LSU, as you might recall, and actually some of you might have forgotten, because most people don't tend to remember seasons around LSU that don't end in Omaha. Well, in 2023, of course, LSU won the national championship, and we all probably should have expected a step back considering LSU was losing Paul Skeens and Dylan Cruz, the greatest pitcher and greatest position player in the history of LSU baseball. They went 1-2 in the draft, and as it turns out, they were both pretty good, as we all knew. Well, we all thought that LSU could just replicate that success because why wouldn't they? We saw a guy like Thatcher Hurd actually be awesome in Omaha, and he was supposed to be the ace of the 2024 staff. You added Luke Holman from Alabama, Gage Jump from UCLA, Tommy White was returning, Bear Jones was taking a step up, and everybody was really excited about the Tigers, but it didn't exactly work out that way. Once LSU got to conference play, my goodness, did they stumble. Tigers lost 2 out of 3 to Mississippi State and lost 2 out of 3 to Florida and got swept at Arkansas. Then lost 2 out of 3 to Vanderbilt, then got swept by Tennessee, and lo and behold, you're at the halfway point of conference play, and you are 3-12. 3-12 at the halfway point. But Tigers got it together as the schedule lightened up. They would win 2 out of 3 against Missouri. They would win 2 out of 3 against Auburn. They would win 2 out of 3 against A&M, which was ranked number 1 in the country, by the way, and that was the series that really changed the season. The Tigers would lose a series on the road against Alabama, which was disappointing. They lost a couple of one-run games, 8-7 and 4-3. But they would sweep Ole Miss when they absolutely had to have it. And then the Tigers would go on a run all the way to the SEC Tournament Championship game, where they would lose eventually to Tennessee 4-3. But that run was good enough to earn LSU the number 2 seed in the Chapel Hill Regional. And after beating Wofford in dramatic fashion, they would lose to North Carolina, come back and blow out Wofford, beat North Carolina, forcing a deciding championship game, which unfortunately the Tigers would lose in 10 innings, despite an absolutely epic performance from a veteran in Will Helmers. So the Tigers season came to an end in an extra inning regional final loss to North Carolina. And anytime LSU season ends short of the College World Series, boy, that ain't great. As a matter of fact, Tigers haven't missed the postseason in back-to-back years since 2010 and 2011. So getting there isn't necessarily the issue for LSU. But advancing once you're there is what the expectation is, and that's what will be the expectation on this LSU team for Jay Johnson. So as we look at LSU, and what is the decided good news for this team is that LSU went and signed the number 1 transfer portal class in the country. Anthony Ianson, right-hander from UC San Diego, could very well be the frontline guy for LSU, the front of the rotation guy before the season ends. Jacob Myers from Nichols was one of the top strikeout pitchers in college baseball last year. He was top 15 in the country in strikeouts. Problem, he walks a lot of guys. But if he transitions and gets his command, he could be awesome. Zach Cohen, who was in that regional for Wofford. Zach Cohen was the Friday night guy for Wofford, now comes to LSU and is going to be probably a inning eating reliever for the Tigers. Daniel Dickinson from Utah Valley. Baseball America rated him the number 2 overall transfer prospect in America. He should settle in at second base for LSU in this new look lineup. And yes, you're replacing Tommy White. And yes, it's disappointing that Connor Griffin, who was the 9th pick of the draft, was an LSU signee, ultimately signed and is headed off to pro ball. But the number 1 portal class in the country certainly puts LSU in a great position to replicate a lot of success or improve upon it, and especially because LSU returns 6 position starters. Now, while you're returning 6 position starters, you're also losing 8 pitchers to the draft. 8. And that's a little interesting because, as Jay Johnson acknowledged, really the bugaboo a year ago was the lack of arms. It played out that way. The injury to Chase Shores in 2023 really affected LSU. Thatcher Hurd not being the guy that we all anticipated he would be really limited this team. You signed the highest rated lefty out of high school in the history of the program in Cam Johnson, and he just really struggled to throw strikes. Now he's at Oklahoma. So, my goodness, you had talent. You just didn't materialize that talent into an effective pitching staff, unfortunately, and it cost you. But this is an LSU team right now that, as we mentioned, went into the transfer portal and signed the number 1 portal class in America and signed the number 1 high school class in America with 2 top 10 players in the country, including William Schmidt from Catholic High in Baton Rouge and Derek Curiel out of California, who may very well be the opening day starter in left field. But we'll get there here in just a minute. Jay Johnson, before LSU opened up practice, met with reporters and talked about all of this, including the fact that even though you've got 6 returning starters in the field and you got a lot of talent on this squad, we know Bear Jones is back. We know Michael Braswell, Stephen Milam, Jake Brown, Josh Pearson, Ashton Larson. You got starters returning galore. But according to Jay Johnson, it's got a lot of personnel stuff they got to figure out.
We have a lot to figure out still relative to where we're going from a personnel standpoint, at least at the outset of this. And then the goal is to win as many games as we can or win every game while figuring out what that best team looks like. And I would say it's not really any different this year, maybe a few more unknowns, just because of the newness of the team. But very excited about the pieces. And, like I said, the players have done a good job, been very coachable, and really excited to get into the next 3 weeks. We have a lot to figure out still.
Well, the next 3 weeks, of course, are the 3 weeks of practice before LSU opens up the season against Purdue, Fort Wayne on February the 14th at the box, and we will count you down to it. In the meantime, we'll knock out our first break. When we come back, we'll take a look at LSU's position players. Who's back? Who's fighting for a job? That's next. It's Locked on LSU, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here. 1 game, 2 teams, endless possibilities. And there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action with live betting all game long. You can adjust your bets as the game unfolds. You can feel the thrill from the kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field. And the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's the icing on the cake. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5. And if you win, you'll score $200 $100 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of Super Bowl 59. Okay, so we're looking at the LSU baseball Tigers. And you know you're losing Tommy White at third, and that's disappointing. And a trio of catchers that were key impact players for you. Brady Neal is gone. Alex Milazzo, who is a great player and a good defensive stalwart for LSU, is gone. Hayden Travinski, who split time as both a DH and as a catcher and was a big power bat in the lineup, is also gone. Now, you look at what returns. Of course, Jared Jones, who clubbed 28 homers a year ago, is back at first base. Michael Braswell, who is your starting shortstop, elected to return. Stephen Milam's back as a freshman All-America who played second base, is moving to the left side of the infield. Now, it's a big question, as we'll get to, who plays short and who plays third. You're returning Jake Brown, Ashton Larson, and also Josh Pearson in the outfield. That's 6 starters from last year's team. But as you'll find out here in a second, in the outfield in particular, certainly nothing is a sure thing as of right now. But when we start talking about the infield, I think we have to start with Stephen Milam, who at the start of last year was not an everyday player, but ultimately got to a point where you could not justify keeping Stephen Milam out of the lineup. He earned all of the playing time that he got. The kid who's nicknamed Monster ended up hitting clutch ABs with homers in the SEC tournament and in regional walk-off wins in the 9th inning. Stephen Milam earned freshman All-America honors in his freshman season when he played in 63 games. He hit .326 with 8 home runs and was sensational for LSU throughout the season. Now he moves to the left side of the infield. But the question that Jay Johnson and his staff have to answer is whether or not Stephen Milam is a better fit at short or at third. Remember, you're returning Braswell at short, but some school of thought is that Braswell might be better at third and Milam's athleticism at short might be better.
Right about the time we decided we were really going to look at that, he went out with an illness. And so we need these 3 weeks to kind of figure that out. The plan, as is to probably split the time between the 2 spots and then figure it out. I think he is a great defensive player, and I think if you played him at shortstop, third base, or obviously second base, he would do a great job. I've gone on record and saying I think he's probably the best defensive infielder that we have, and you may see us roll him over to the right side of the bag when certain hitters are up, like we did with Jordan Thompson in 2023.
So if Stephen Milam is the best defensive infielder that you have, playing at third base is not utilizing his talents to the fullest. If he's your best defensive infielder, he's going to play shortstop. And especially if Daniel Dickinson is going to play second base, which is pretty clear. The other thing, and I would highly encourage if you missed the episode where, as we've been taking it, a sort of a position grouping preview with our buddy Ryan Terrio, of course, former LSU legend. We looked at the infield, the outfield. Next week, we're looking at the pitching, depending on when you're watching this. But if you go back, you can find the episode where we do a preview of the infield. And Terrio talks, and so it's not my opinion. This is a guy who was an all-conference player at LSU, a 3-year starter, and a guy who played a dozen years of professional baseball, including 9 MLB seasons. He said, Milam's best position is shortstop, and Braswell is probably better suited at third just because of the general lack of lateral quickness. He's better suited at third base. So that's probably, it stands to reason, how this is going to play out. But in time, we'll wait and see exactly what does happen there. But that all seems to be how it's going to happen. Now, the other big question is, what do you do behind the plate? I just told you lost Brady Neal, you lost Alex Milazzo, and you lost Hayden Travinski. So you got Blaze Priester coming in from JUCO, who's a big power hitting at batter, who's probably not a great arm, but maybe not as great a defensive catcher as Cade Arambidi, the freshman coming in, who's one of the top players in the country, another top 15 player in the country to show up on campus, a guy that was thought to be a lock to sign a professional contract, struggled with the bat a bit his senior year of high school, ended up not getting his numbers. number, came to LSU. Then you've got a guy like Luis Hernandez transferring in from Indiana State, who's a big power hitting bat, was first team all conference at Indiana State, but might end up in a DH type role at LSU. But Jay Johnson was asked what he's looking for at catcher. Here was the answer.
I have a lot of confidence in that group. And it's probably something that will be sorted out. You know, when you ask what I'm looking for is like, what is winning in baseball? It's scoring runs and it's preventing runs. So what's our best path to having the right guy in the at-bats when the catcher comes up to help us score more runs and then obviously prevent runs? And at that position, really important, because other than the balls put in play, they touch the ball every single pitch. The game's built around strikes and balls. Well, the catcher has a lot of say in that. So it's about who's going to help us on those things.
If just to put into context where Jay is talking about, you're going to figure that stuff out. So a year ago in 2024, I mentioned you had 3 catchers, right? And it's worth noting that LSU, Hayden Travinski played in 65 games, started 65 games. LSU played 66. Travinski started 65 of the 66. Now, he caught and DH'd, remember. Alex Milazzo played in 50 games. He was a late inning defensive replacement lot, but he started 31 times at catcher. And then there's Brady Neal, who played in 44 games and started 33 games. Now, Brady Neal did have a brief stint where he was playing in the outfield, but the point is, Travinski was, by and large, your DH. Neal and Milazzo were mostly your starting catchers. Now, Neal did play some first base also, just as they were figuring out what they were going to do with him. But the point is, we saw an opportunity for Travinski to get 65 starts, Milazzo to get 31 starts, Neal to get 33 starts, Milazzo to play in 50 games, Neal to play in 44 games, and Travinski played in 65. There's 3 guys who all got a ton of playing time. So it is possible that you could see all of those guys get run this year, in talking about Priester, Kate Arambidi, and then Luis Hernandez as well. Here was Jay Johnson, one follow-up on catcher and how they're going to handle that position here early.
The plan will be over the scrimmages is to get them prepared to play. Like 2 of them are going to catch a full day and then DH, and then the other 2 are going to DH and then catch a full day to get used to the full game, thing, and then have a day off of catching. At least that's the plan. And then you got to kind of work in, does so-and-so need to catch so-and-so based on reps and fall, and what might be a matchup be, or maybe somebody receives a certain type of pitcher better. So again, it's another deal where we have some sorting out to do.
They have sorting out to do, but as I just laid out for you, they did it a year ago. And remember, Paul Skeens liked to be caught by Alex Milazzo, who's a better defensive catcher, receiving the baseball, framing pitches, stealing strikes. Like, that may happen. There may be guys where if you feel like it's going to be a more offensive day, you're going to want Priester in the lineup because he's a more offensive catcher. If you think it might be more defensive, maybe if you feel like Arambidi is the better defensive player, he's the guy that gets the start. I just think you're going to see, unless if one of these guys establishes himself as someone who cannot come out of the lineup, I think you're going to see all 3 of them play a lot throughout the course of this season. And again, as they showed a year ago, it is very possible for them to use 3 catchers in a variety of different roles. Now, there's one other position player that's worth mentioning. Actually, I got to talk about the outfield as well. But what's going to be fascinating in this lineup is Bear Jones. So Bear Jones returns. Remember, he was a draft-eligible sophomore and could have gone pro, but elected to return after hitting 28 home runs a season ago. And there's no Tommy White in the lineup to protect him. So a big question now is, okay, you got Bear Jones. Is anybody else in this lineup capable of hitting 20 homers? Is anybody else in this lineup capable of that type of production whereby teams can't pitch around Bear Jones? Remember, in 2023, you had teams intentionally walking Dylan Cruz to get to Tommy White, who led the country in RBI. Like, that was a pick your poison, and teams just had to choose. Well, if you don't have protection for Bear Jones, teams could pitch around him, walk him, and then take their shot with whoever's behind him. So Jay Johnson was asked, got anybody on his team that could smash 20?
I'm excited about the offense in the terms of it's probably more of a sum of the parts thing. You know, I felt like we ended up being a good offensive team at the end of last year, but it was a little bit reliant on, you know, Jared and Tommy hitting the ball over the fence, and both of them had 20, but I don't know if there is, you know, to be quite honest with you. I don't know that I want any of them to try to do that. I do think there's guys on the roster that will in their time here at LSU. I don't know if that's this year, but I think there's plenty of guys capable of hitting 8 to 12, and some of that is more predicated on what we do with the personnel. And, you know, what's that line in Moneyball? Like, you know, they're trying to replace Giambi and Johnny Damon. And, you know, like you can't replace Giambi with one player. You replace him with 3 players. It's maybe what we're doing with Tommy White.
Maybe it's a situation where the Tigers end up with 8 guys that hit double-digit homers this year. And that's how you replace the numbers in total. But it still remains to be seen. Someone has got to, in this lineup, prove that if you pitch around Bear Jones, they can make you pay. And that remains to be seen. Okay, it is Locked on LSU, your team every day. God, we still got a lot of ground to cover. Got to talk about the outfield and the pitching staff. We'll get to that as we continue Locked on LSU, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting and wondering some more. Now, Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return, while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. All so you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now, this is Taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live Full Service. Real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. I want to talk about the pitchers in just a quick second, but it's also worth noting the outfield. Now, LSU returns 2 starters, 3 starters, as a matter of fact, in the outfield. Ashton Larson, Jake Brown, Josh Pearson. But as we noted also in our outfield preview with Ryan Terry, which I would highly recommend you go check out just a few episodes back, with Chris Stanfield coming in from Auburn and Derek Curiel, a top 10 player in the country, showing up on campus, Larson and Pearson, their jobs may be up for grabs. But as Jay Johnson said, there is no shortage of options in the outfield.
I think in the last game that we played against North Carolina last year, Josh was in left, Jake Brown was in center, and Ashton Larson was in right. Those guys are all back, which is great. We obviously added Chris Stanfield from Auburn. We added Derek Curiel, really good freshman player. You're still looking at Ethan Fry, who's finally healthy, which is great. Mick Paul has played really good, and, you know, underrated, you know, story. Had a really significant health issue last year that happened during the season, and he was redshirting, and for him to make it back is pretty remarkable, to be honest with you. So Dalton Beck, who will also figure into DH at bats. Like, I have 8 guys we could play right now out there, and I don't know that there would be much drop off.
8 players in the outfield that they feel like they could play without much drop-off. It is worth noting in the first scrimmage, okay, so LSU opened up practice on Friday. They went out there over the weekend and scrimmaged for the first time, and it was Curiel, the freshman, in left. It was Chris Stanfield, the Auburn transfer, in center, and it was Josh Pearson in right. So Jake Brown was not out there for the first scrimmage. So make no mistake, there was going to be a lot of rotating among those players in the outfield to see who sticks. Look, Ashton Larson was a guy who, as a true freshman, hit over 300 for you. A guy who, when you were struggling, when you started 3-12 in conference play, and you were trying to find who were the guys you could count on, was a guy you could count on. So it's hard to believe that he's not going to play a role on this team. But if he's not, That means somebody really good stole those reps from him. Now, the question everybody asks all the time is, who's going to be the starting rotation? Well, a year ago, that was a bugaboo for LSU. Luke Holman from Alabama, Gage Jump from UCLA ended up emerging as your 1-2 punch. It was unfortunate that Thatcher Hurd never really gained that spot, and it was a problem for LSU, quite honestly. Griffin Herring was awesome for LSU out of the bullpen last year, but he's off to pro ball as well. So the truth about LSU is they had to go into the portal and they had to go get arms. And my goodness, did they ever go get arms. Anthony Ianson, the right-hander from UC San Diego, one of the top pitchers in the entire portal class. He comes into LSU. You look at a guy like Zach Cohen from Wofford, who we just talked about. Undeniable, was Wofford's Friday night guy a year ago, coming into LSU after that season at Wofford. Connor Ware, a JUCO pitcher, a lefty, 6'4", 221, could very well figure into your rotation right away, or could be a key arm out of the bullpen. It's pretty incredible when you think. We haven't started talking about the righties. I mentioned Ianson and Zach Cohen. Jacob Myers, who we talked about, from Nichols, one of the top 10 strikeout pitcher in the country. Chandler Dorsey coming in from South Florida, who could figure in the back end of the bullpen. Connor Benj from Dallas Baptist is a righty, 6 foot, 194-pounder, could also figure in. You have no shortage of arms. And look, Devin Sheeran, who is a big 6'5" righty from Mount St. Mary's, those 100, tore his ACL this summer. Otherwise, he would be a guy that would really factor in. And that's not even counting the guys that you have coming back. Gavin Guidry's back, who could certainly step up and play a big role. We're excited to see Jaden Newt healthy and what he could look like for LSU. Cade Anderson, who was the number one pitcher in Louisiana a year ago, was so good in the non-conference, struggled against conference hitters, but is back and could very well be a front-of-the-rotation guy. DJ Primo looks like he's ready to be a key contributor for you. So the bottom line is you have no shortage of arms right now. The big question is, what roles do all of these pitchers fill? And maybe the biggest is Chase Shores. So Chase Shores is a 6'7" righty who throws 100, was an impact guy as a true freshman in 2023, tore his UCL, had Tommy John, missed the rest of 23 and all of 2024, but he's back, and Jay Johnson knows that is massive for this team.
Very excited to have him back. The 23-year, I just mentioned you promise adversity. There wasn't a ton of adversity in that. Him going down, was a thunderbolt there, but it really impacted last year. It really impacted last year, especially when you look at, say, everything plays out the same. You have Luke Holman, Gage Jump, and Chase Shores. It's a different deal. And so his arm looks great. He's really throwing strikes. Really like where the mindset's at.
If I believe that Chase Shores is the biggest wild card on this team. I don't know that's necessarily a bold prediction or anything like that. But when you're talking about a guy in Chase Shores who is a 6'5", 220-pound righty that can throw 100 and could potentially be your Friday night guy, if he emerges as that, well, now all of a sudden you've got your dominant Friday night guy. And then maybe someone like Cade Anderson from the left side is your number two. And then you're looking up and going, is Anthony Ianson one of the top portal pitchers in the country? Is that your number three? Because if that's your number three, now you're looking and going, that means you got Zach Cohen, who was the Friday night ace for Wofford coming out of the bullpen. You got Jacob Myers, who was a top 10 strikeout pitcher in the country last year coming out of the bullpen. You got Connor Ware coming out of the bullpen. Oh, have we mentioned William Schmidt, by the way? The number 5 prospect in the country from Catholic High in Baton Rouge shows up on campus. And, oh, by the way, you got William Schmidt. as well, ready to
Got
go.
a lot of talent, obviously, but what I've been more impressed with is the poise, composure, mound presence, readiness. Like, he is going to be significant on this team this year and can be as good as we would want him to be and he wants to be. There's a few specific things we're doing with him that I'm excited about. Coach Yeski has really, pinned some things down, and, you obviously see him, sooner rather than later in terms of the course of the season.
So William Schmidt, when you talk about the stuff, this is a guy with a breaking ball. He was the number 16 overall draft prospect by MLB.com. Not high school, like the number 16 overall prospect shows up on campus. He had a .44 ERA at Catholic High, which won the national championship, by the way. National championship. 102 strikeouts in 63 2/3 innings pitched. That's almost a 2-to-1 ratio. Again, it's high school, but he was unfair. And the stuff is undeniable. But what's most interesting about what Jay Johnson said there is about the poise. Because you talk to people around the Catholic High program, which candidly, as many of you know, is where I went and actually emceed the Grizzly Greats induction for Austin and Aaron Nola last week. And this week I'm emceeing the Catholic High baseball first pitch banquet. So I'm connected there. People there say the poise, the demeanor for Schmidt is reminiscent of Nola. So that's high praise, because I think Aaron Nola is the best pitcher in the history of LSU baseball. Not the most talented, because Paul Skeens and Ben McDonald had the most arm talent. But Aaron Nola had the best career and was the best pitcher in the history of LSU baseball. And I think his 10 should be retired. But anyway, we'll get there another day. If you're talking about poise and you bring up Nola's name, you got my attention. And then you match it with the talent of a top 15 prospect, top 20 prospect. Yeah, Schmidt will have some role on this team. May not be in the rotation as a freshman. Maybe by the end of the season. But that's a guy who will have a key role on this team for whatever LSU will be. So this is a Tiger team that you can tell there's a lot of reason why people are excited. Yes, you're returning 6 position players, but you're losing key guys as well. You lose 8 pitchers to the draft, including, arguably your 3 best pitchers, maybe even on top of that, even more when you talk about losing Gage Jump and Luke Holman and Thatcher Hurd and Griffin Herring, Nate Ackenhouse, and a veteran you're losing to the draft as well. You lose a bunch of guys. But you're losing a bunch of guys from a team that was 13-17 in the conference and a team that failed to get out of regional play. You bring in a whole bunch of talented dudes that were at the top of their portal class, but a bunch of dudes from lower levels that are taking a step up in competition to the SEC. How do they make that transition? Most certainly, everyone will not make the transition smoothly. There will be guys who struggle, undeniably. But there are going to be guys who knock it out of the park. Well, if you'll excuse the baseball pun. I think LSU's got plenty of talent. Certainly the key is making sure you win enough games in the regular season, among 56, to make sure the road to Omaha runs through Alec Box Stadium. And if that happens, LSU should punch its ticket back into the College World Series. And then it's a matter of playing your best baseball over 10 days in Omaha in June. See if they can do it. You certainly have the talent to get there and win it all again. All right, that'll do it for us here on today's episode of Locked on LSU. Do us a favor, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Rate us, leave a review. If you're on YouTube, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you're notified whenever we post a new video, and let a friend know they love the Tigers. We got you here every single day for Locked on LSU, your team every day.